Welcome to the City Council study session on Monday, March 19th. Our first agenda item this evening is MUB1, MUB2 Commercial Code Requirements discussion. We have Community Development Planner Brooke Bill with us to present the proposed amendment to the UDC commercial requirement in the MUB1 and MUB2 zone districts. Good evening.
Good evening. Tonight we're here to discuss a proposed amendment to the Unified Development Code relating to a commercial requirement in the Unified Development Code that requires that any new residential development incorporate at least a commercial use on at least 50% of the ground floor. So for a little bit of history on that, prior to 2007, the Unified Development Code allowed standalone residential uses that were multi-unit, and that meant 4 units or more. It allowed standalone residential uses in the MUB1 and B2 zone districts. At the time, you could not do a standalone residential development that had 1, 2, or 3 units in those zone districts. So back then, in an effort to allow a mixed-use development in some of those smaller 1, 2, or I should say 2 or 3 unit developments, there was an amendment made to the code that allowed a residential use to go into a new residential use to go into the B1 or B2 zone districts for 2 or more residential units, provided that at least 50% of the ground floor was utilized as commercial space. Well, since that amendment, it's become apparent that that ground floor commercial requirement is not very realistic in many portions of the B1 and B2 zone districts. In fact, since 2013, there have been 5 variance cases granted by the Board of Adjustment and Appeals that reduced that ground floor commercial requirement from 50% down to 0%, essentially. In each of those 5 cases, the applicant or property owner cited location and or market conditions in their request to lower that requirement from 50% down to 0%. Now, the MUB1 and B2 zone districts are located primarily along our more heavily traveled commercial districts, or commercial corridors, I should say, and that being Broadway and 285 or Hamden. But those same B1 and B2 zone districts in some locations extend beyond those more heavily traveled corridors into streets like Lincoln, Sherman, Acoma, Bannock, even Cherokee. In terms of those 5 variance cases, none of them was located with frontage on Broadway itself or US 285. They were, in each of those cases, they were off Broadway or 285. In 2011, BBC Research did a report for the city on retailing in Inglewood, and what they found was that there was an oversupply of retail within the city per capita. They also indicated that some of the national trends, and that was back in 2011, they noted a consolidation of retailers, a reduction of retailers, and then obviously the growth of online retailing that has continued since that time. So in 2016, the Planning and Zoning Commission held study sessions and ultimately a public hearing on this 50% ground floor commercial requirement in the B1 and B2 zone district. And what they ended up recommending was to limit that ground floor commercial requirement in the B1 and B2 zone districts to the 33, 34, and 3,500 blocks of South Broadway, essentially our downtown. That amendment was voted on and recommended to council for approval by a vote of 7-1. And so here we are. So tonight, we wanted to bring forward this, prior to bringing an ordinance forward to City Council, we wanted to bring it to study session for discussion on the topic. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Olson.
She was first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Wink.
It's a recommendation from planning and zoning. Thank you for this. The recommendation from planning and zoning was so long ago that we've been considering lowering from 50%. Oh yeah, so, thank you. Why are we only talking about it now?
Good question. After it went to the Planning and Zoning Commission in November of 2016. And after that, there were some shifts in priorities. There were other things brought forward to council. I wish we would have brought it forward sooner. Shortly after that, there was the adoption of the comprehensive plan. We formed the Historic Preservation Commission. We brought forward some recommendations from ULI for the city center area. There was the South Broadway improvements that were discussed, and then we had budget, short-term rentals, accessory dwelling units. So some other things kind of came to the forefront, but it would have been nice to bring it sooner. Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson.
No, I guess my question is the same thing. With it was the date of it. So they have not seen this since then. Did they think we had brought it, that it had been brought forward?
There wasn't, we were trying to schedule it even in back last fall, and it just kept dragging out. And
because we didn't have any time on our docket, or what? I don't.
There were some. It was taken off a couple of times, but at any rate, we're here now.
Sure.
I too would have liked to have brought it sooner.
So I think what I'm concerned about, it makes sense to me. I am a little nervous about how old some of these things are, particularly with the retail study. It's 2011, that's 7 years ago. We've gone through quite a change economically in the area. I just want to make sure that this is still something that fits, and I wonder if it might make, I don't know, maybe it makes sense to have planning and zoning look at it one more time and say, is this still fitting with everything that we're doing? It looks to me like it is, but they're aware that it hasn't come forward as well, but they probably have a lot of new members that don't.
They've got a couple new members, and if that is council's wish, we can do that. If we do that, I would like to have some discussion in case there's anything from tonight that could add to their conversation. If it's brought back to them for, concurrence on the previous decision they made.
Okay, and I think we can hopefully get some more information. I would like to ask, if we go to 0% commercial use on the ground floor, will it take us back to 2007 zoning, or could they build multi-unit buildings? Were both of those things tied together? Multi-units, because right now it is single-family homes in that area, correct?
Correct. In some of those areas.
Not
Okay.
all.
Not all of them. But so in 2007, if you were a single-family home or a 2-unit home or a 3-unit home in the B1 or B2 zone district, you were considered non-conforming, but you were grandfathered to keep using it in that manner, but you could not build any new ones. Also in 2007, you could build new 4 or more unit developments without any commercial. What the amendment did in 2007, addressed a little bit of both sides of that. It allowed somebody to do as small as a 2 or 3 unit residential development, but then it also required that whether you were a 2 unit, a 3 unit, or a 20 unit development in the residential development in the B1 or B2 zone district, you had to incorporate 50% of the ground floor as being commercial. Single unit residential in the B1 and B2 was, prior to 2007 and even now, a non-conforming use. There are a couple of them on Broadway.
Okay, so, but was it, I don't know if upgraded is the right word, was it changed to MUB1 and MUB2 from a single-family?
Zone district?
Yes.
No, the boundaries of those B1 and B2 zone districts have not changed at all since 2007 and before.
Okay, and then,
And this amendment would not change that either.
okay,
It would merely limit that 50% ground floor commercial requirement to the 33, 34, and 3,500 blocks of properties fronting Broadway.
okay, so that means that the properties on Lincoln and Sherman would be able to do it without the commercial.
Correct.
Okay, and the one other question, and I'm not sure if it's tied to this or not, because I have gotten a call from a few residents in the last month or two about the concern about the historic overlay that they fought for on Lincoln, Sherman, and Grant. And are any of these properties impacted?
No, there's nothing in the neighborhood preservation overlay that would be impacted. That neighborhood preservation overlay district was over the MUR3B zone district. There is a portion of the B1 zone district that is right across the alley from the neighborhood preservation overlay district. So that B1 and that neighborhood preservation overlay district do meet in the alley between Lincoln and Sherman.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councilmember Berentine.
I appreciate the observation that Councilmember Wink has brought up, and Councilmember Olson, a huge concern. The entire world has changed in 7 years. I mean, you went through a litany of things just that the city has done, including a comprehensive plan, and even for us to try and go back on this, we're dealing with information that's 7 years old, and I don't think that's fair to the council or fair to the planning zoning board. I would agree with Councilmember Olson that this should be brought back directly to the current planning and zoning board so that they could take it in the context of the current comp plan, current president, the current world. Everything has changed. 7 years is a huge amount of time, including this board has changed several times. So you have new members, and they have a little bit more, they may have a little bit different perspective given that they've gone through the comp plan and some current information. So I really am not comfortable at this time to try and give any kind of guidance on something that is this old. With that information, there isn't a context for that. It's like trying to say that you knew something was going to happen 7 years ago when it's 7 years later. That doesn't make you a fortune teller. It just makes it 7 years later. So we want to make sure that we give them an opportunity to take a stab at this first and see what they wanted to do. Obviously, through the public hearing and discussion, they changed their mind on what they wanted to do with Broadway even at that time. And then council, just a couple of years later, when did you start the new comp plan?
Oh,
Like
ages ago.
14.
14. So huge differences have been done in the meantime. And I'm not so sure that it didn't get addressed with council as much as that with everything going on, that they made the decision that they'd be better off doing the comp plan and changing a lot of other things that might make this seriously obsolete in the whole scheme of things, and I would like it to fit in with the whole scheme of things, but it's way too old for me to even want to sit there and start giving guidance either to staff or to the Planning and Zoning Board. I would like them to take a fresh look at it.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. It notes that 5 variances have been granted since the new code was put into place. Do you know when the last one was, by chance?
Yes, the last one that was granted was in 2016.
That was 16 as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. The thing that jumps out with me is all 5 of the variances that have been granted have been off Broadway. And I see the difficulty in working commercial into that area. But then this seems to open all of Broadway, the front-facing side up, with the exception of those 3 blocks you mentioned. I'm not sure if there's a huge appetite right now for the ability to just put up very large scale. And if I'm understanding correctly, as long as it's more than 4 units, there wouldn't be any cap to the amount of units you could place into one of
Correct.
these buildings. Without any commercial on the ground level, that does concern me. I would wonder not only where is planning and zoning at, again, with this currently, but also where the neighborhoods are. I'd certainly like to get some more feedback from both parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wink.
Thanks. Just to consider a different point of view, is this really that obsolete if planning and zoning made the proposal to make the amendment in 2016? I'm not posing that to you, Mr. Bell, to my colleagues here, but you seem as if you want to answer. And I'm also, in that vein, I'm curious to know when the research or analysis was conducted to assess retail space versus as compared to, or per capita, what amount of funds did the city put forward to support that work?
There was a study done by the city with a consultant, BBC
Right,
Research.
BBC.
I guess I could comment on your comments a little bit. The information from 2011 is old, and I don't know what that information would bring forward now. I think we have seen information, at least on the retail side of things, for retail struggling.
Even more, right.
But we are in a different economy, obviously, than we were in 2011.
Yeah.
So that information is relatively old. In terms of the Planning and Zoning Commission, yes, they did, decide on this in November of 2016. With that said, another year has passed,
Sure.
and they do have a couple of new members. I do think that, I guess, a couple of just other points to make of some things that haven't necessarily changed a whole lot. These properties, we weren't seeing as much development, from 2007 to 2013. So it took us a while to become aware of it because there was not as much interest in redeveloping. In terms of, just to get an order of magnitude, what most of these property owners or applicants are citing is that it's visibility, it's traffic. You take a street like Broadway, which gets approximately 28,000 vehicles a day. And then you even take a street that's more of a collector/arterial, like Logan, and that might be getting 8,000 to 10,000 cars a day. And then you take a street like Lincoln or Sherman, and they're getting less than 1,000 in hundreds per day. So I don't think we've heard from, that concern doesn't seem to have changed a whole lot, at least in terms of the property owners. But I would agree that 2011 information is a bit old.
Yeah.
And again, we have had a couple of new Planning and Zoning Commission.
Some new membership, sure. The thought behind this my current comments is, and maybe it's something for moving forward, but I'm concerned about growing losses if the city invests time and resources other than time into doing this work, and then it comes to council based on prioritization or whatever has happened, and then council feels we need to send it back to be redone, and again, and how much are we losing each time when we raise something and we're redoing work? I would like to see us able to move things forward more. I mean, I've only been here since November, but that does concern me. So I would love to move this forward tonight. I do see the point about 2011 being a little dated, but I'd also like to hear from my fellow council members who maybe haven't spoken yet.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Olson.
Yeah, I have not seen anything like this ever happen in my time on council where it's been this late. So I mean, something else is going on, I think, here. But I know that there are people on those streets that do not want commercial at all on the bottom if they have to have multifamily there. They would prefer to just have people living there and not restaurants or this on some of those blocks in some of those areas. So when variances were made in some cases, they were pleased.
Correct.
Very pleased. So I think that needs to be said. So this is about whether or not there's retail commercial in their neighborhood, which is very close to Broadway, and so they feel like there's an encroachment. So I get where this is going, and it makes sense to me that this would be a good thing to do. I'm a little nervous about how late it is. So I've never seen anything come this late before, so I just wondered if I missed it before. And so for that reason, I don't know if we could refresh it with connecting it, and maybe this is a thing going forward too with comp plan whenever we're doing zoning, would be to connect it with where does it fit with what in our comp plan we have said we want to do. And if we could call that out in this document, that would help me to say, you know what, let's not make planning and zoning redo everything. It really does fit with where we were going anyway. Let's not have it be this late again, and if it is, let's have a statute of limitations on these decisions so that we all know there's some urgency to get this before council so it doesn't waste their time back in 2016. I think that's what you were getting at, Councilmember Wink.
I think if it went back to Planning and Zoning Commission and we did as you said, I think that's doable. I think that study wasn't done in 2011 just for this.
Right.
It was done in a more global sense. I think to completely redo that would be a lot bigger deal than merely taking this particular issue back to Planning and Zoning Commission. I think one of the things I didn't mention is that this proposed amendment certainly doesn't limit anybody from doing commercial.
Right.
So they don't lose that right whatsoever. It's more, instead of forcing them to do commercial, it gives them the option, and it's very dependent on location. I think what we have found, we don't have terrible vacancy rates with our retail by any measure here in the city of Inglewood overall. But what we're finding is it's really location. It's kind of location based and building based. We see it around here a little bit in this development that retail has really struggled, and along Inglewood Parkway, and that's primarily location based. Some of the other things we've heard is it's building type. We had somebody on Broadway within the last year who wanted to take what was a office building, kind of a 1960s office building, and they wanted to convert it to residential, which they could not do. They had to keep 50% commercial. There was also an interested party who came in for one of the motels, and what they wanted to do was take one of the motels and combine individual hotel rooms that are whatever they are, 300-400 square feet, combine them and remodel them and get rid of the motel use and do a renovated apartment kind of product. So it doesn't take away the right to do commercial. It just doesn't require them to do commercial. But I see your point in terms of Planning and Zoning Commission, and we could keep it, focused.
So maybe, I wanted to follow up on that, but maybe
Go ahead.
Member Martinez
Thank you.
say something first.
Councilmember Martinez?
Sure. I agree with a lot of what my fellow council members have said tonight. My concern was that the information was pretty dated. But you said, my question was that information or that research probably was not specifically for this particular recommendation. Obviously, it was a bigger citywide retail look.
Correct.
Is that what it was for?
Correct.
And then this was kind of influenced by the information that came out at that time and the variance requests?
Correct, because we didn't even get the first variance request until 2013.
And the changes were made in 2007, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And so the variance requests, started in 2013.
Okay. I have similar concerns about, doing work and then getting it to us and then sending it back. So I guess I have a question for council. If we send it back, are there other specific pieces of information that we would like them to take a look at, or different ways for them to think about it? Are we just focusing on these 3 blocks, or like you mentioned, is it specific building types? So I guess that's just a question for us if we want to send it back. Are there other things we want them to consider when they reevaluate this, if we send it back?
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Berentine?
I don't think you need to be concerned about when we spend money to get information isn't a prerequisite that we're going to do the project. And it isn't a failure if we don't do the project. Sometimes the information is that we shouldn't do something. And I think that's kind of what ended up happening here, is that the synergy of what was going on and all of the issues that were going on ended up leading council to believe that they needed to redo the comp plan first, and that needs to be considered with this. So it is not doing your job if we don't do these kind of studies just to make things happen. Sometimes they show us that something shouldn't happen, and we've had so much happen in the meantime. I really think that I would like to have Planning and Zoning take a fresh eye at this. The meeting on the PUD recently, and the strategic plan that we have here, and the information we've just gotten from citizens and their pushback, as Councilmember Cuesta has brought up, they are not happy with the density, and so there is a different opinion going on right now. You don't have the same kind of push for, even population is going down now in Colorado, where it wasn't during that period of time when we were seeing an upswing. So I really would like them to take a fresh eye with all of the new information that's going on. It is never a waste for us to have information. It's only, we just don't want to rush things or have knee-jerk reactions for those kind of issues. I'd rather it was redone. 7 years is just way too long for me. So. And I am concerned that if we're doing something, well, you said that that information is still valuable, but we've also done Inglewood Forward, Inglewood Next Step. I mean, we have tons more consultants we paid, more studies we got, more meetings with the community that we've done since 2011 that would be more useful in kind of planning this out and deciding exactly what area, how far it should go, and especially with this density issue and the traffic issues going on in that area, I think that we might get a little bit different feedback. So I'd like them to take a fresh look at it. Given the current information from the comp plan, Next Up, Inglewood Forward, that whole plan, that's only been done in the last 3 years.
Right.
That's a much more viable, feedback for them to be doing, even stuff from the strategic plan currently that we have. So I'd just like them to relook at this entire situation.
Thank you, Councilmember Berentine. Councilmember Olson, and I really would like to draw this to a conclusion so we can move on to the next agenda item.
Yeah, so I actually have some ideas. I'd like to see us send it back to them, but I'd like to know what the time frame would be, and Did something stimulate this to come up right now? Did something just happen where you thought, oh my goodness, if we could get this through, it would help? Or?
No, there was a variance request.
Okay.
Basically last week.
Right, I saw
It was in
that
the
one.
works. But no, we've been trying to get this.
Where was that for?
That was for a property.
So that helps to know that there was something that probably helped relook at this. But I do think there are a number of things beyond the 2011 study that could be refreshing the background for this. It makes sense to me that this probably would be what we would go forward with, although I'd want to see how it connects with the comp plan. But I think it's going to take a little bit more work. But I would love to see if the 2011 data has some drop-ins for new information that we already know, like changes in retail openings and vacancies and that kind of thing, that would upgrade that a bit. I realize it's not the same as BBC doing it for us, or BC, whatever their name was.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that can be, sometimes those things are just templates. You can put in what we know today on them that would help, and then something on that puts in a comp plan kind of connection with this to show that it really does meet, or priority-based budgeting too with some of that, and then a time frame of, how, I don't want this to take forever either. I mean, I don't know that they need to do another public hearing unless it's so out of whack that they think, yeah, this is way out of whack with what the comp plan was. And the last thing I'd like us to consider at some point would be, I mean, I've not seen this happen very often or at all, so policy on time frame of things that have been decided on by a board and commission like them, that there be some end date that they know it can go before council, and that we're going to decide so that 2 years later they don't have to undo or rethink what did we think back then and who was on here and why did they come up with this. I think it makes sense, but I don't want to do it without having a little bit more. That would be mine.
Thank you, Councilmember Olson.
Can I ask a point of information for the city attorney?
Yes.
Is there any requirement once planning and zoning is voted on anything for it to come to council?
Yes. If what they're doing is voting on a document that's a recommendation to the council to update code or update basically anything that's going to have to be done by ordinance, then yes, it would have to come to council.
So maybe we're just keeping a closer eye on that as well, too. So we'll get some update on that separately from
That could be. I'm not actually tracking directly with what planning and zoning are doing, so I can't answer that specifically.
Maybe you should.
Is there a time frame for it to come to council after planning and zoning makes the decision?
Every type of decision has different standards, but for the most part, we don't have very many strict time frames about getting things around. It's something that we're going to want to look at.
Okay.
Well, just so long as we come up with some kind of, Councilmember Olson brings up a good point that we have some process and procedure to make sure that that's happening, so that we're in compliance with the charter and also doing it timely. Thank you.
Thank you. So do you have enough information now?
I think so. I am aware that there are time frames on PUDs between the neighborhood meeting and the public hearing in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And maybe there is. I'm not aware of anything on ordinances. But yes, I think I do have enough to go on. If there is consensus that...
I think there is consensus to send it back to planning and zoning, and it very likely could be that they'll see immediately what needs to be done. And so thank you very much for bringing the information forward.
Thank you, Mr.
Moving on to our next agenda item, Council Strategic Planning Community Workshops follow-up. Assistant City Manager Mark Wolf is here to present the results of Strategic Planning Community Workshops and suggest the next steps for City Council Strategic Plan. Good evening, Mr. Wolf.
Good evening. All right, so I'm going to go through some of your results from the two sessions and suggest next steps.
Oh.
I'll talk about it.
I thought you were...
So thanks again for your participation. They were your sessions. Your participation was great. The feedback that I got just asides from the most part from both sessions were very positive from the public. So kudos to you for moving that along and participating in those sessions. I tried to highlight some of your themes from the community's themes from the workshops. Just estimated attendance from the 2 sessions. We didn't require any sign-ins or anything like that, so this is just a guess. But about 15 folks were out at our March 7th meeting, and then the March 15th was a bit better attended, around 30, I'd say, were in the room for that session last Thursday. Just a quick reminder of what the agenda was. We started with some introductions, what you all hope to get out of the community sessions, allowed people to reflect individually on some of the questions, then broadening it out from there. Most of the time we did not get to the large group Q&A for time purposes, but that's all right. There was a lot of good discussion before then. So for tonight, I've highlighted a few things. Really 3 elements are key here, looking at your SWOT, or your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and themes that the community members came up with. Feedback on your council themes or your proposed council themes that we discussed a while back. Fiscal sustainability, historic past, smart future, safe, fun, active, engaged community, reliable infrastructure and community parks, and organizational excellence. Then we also allow the community opportunity to let us know what was missing from those categories. And then lastly, I'll suggest some next steps to move this forward. And again, I just want to do a disclaimer here that I could not possibly get every single comment that was made during the course of both nights. So I don't claim to have captured everything. I tried to pull out the things that were mentioned most frequently, but there could certainly be things I missed. So if there is, feel free to add them. Looking at overall strengths, some of these will look familiar. I think there was a lot of overlap from what you all came up with overall. Small town feel, sense of community, location, affordability. I won't list everything, but you see a lot of our assets that we've talked about together. We certainly appreciate some of the feedback on city staff, not to say that there weren't suggested improvements, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we appreciate some of the feedback there. And then parks, transit, library, the location of the community in relationship to the metro area, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the weaknesses, traffic, rapid change in some neighborhoods, crime, issues with code and charter being outdated, commercial vacancies, lack of mixed use, that came up a few times, absentee landlords, so some issues with rental properties in some areas. Enforcement of our code was something that frequently came up. Resistance to change, I think that was overall, looking at it from the community perspective, and then this theme of kind of lack of direction overall in the community, and then specifically, and again, I'm just the messenger with City Council. But we're addressing that with this. Opportunities, opportunity to create identity, employment opportunities, increase our walkability, bikeability in the area, to engage new residents and renters, mixed-use redevelopment, preserve the character of our neighborhoods, increase small and innovative businesses, and broaden and continue our momentum with community events. Some of the threats to overall success that were identified. Lack of affordability, so it was kind of a pro and a con. Yes, generally Englewood is affordable, but we're also seeing trends go the other way, so we're concerned about the lack of affordability overall, housing, retail, et cetera. Divisiveness in the community was mentioned a few times. Managing growth poorly. Again, I think, as you all know, are very aware of, that what that means to different people can vary quite a bit. But that was something mentioned a lot, was that, well, we just need to make sure we're managing growth in the right way, or smartly, or not poorly. So take that as you will. Crime as a threat, loss of the neighborly feel was mentioned, lack of funding, and again, this idea of resistance to change came up. some of the potential themes, and this was posed as a 2018 potential theme for the community. Coming together, sense of community, that was mentioned a few times, the golden rule, hopefully you all know that. Smart growth and development, customer service excellence, sustainability, and strong neighborhoods were some of the themes that came out. Moving to kind of the big group exercise was asking folks to respond to your proposed 5 themes or goal areas. And what we asked the community to do was to place a sticky note or a thought on something that absolutely needed to be included in one of those themes or was missing as a part of the theme, or they just wanted to make sure was reflected in some way. And this varied quite a bit, but I did try to capture some of the ones that had multiple responses or check marks or whatnot from the 2 evenings. Fiscal sustainability, additional revenue streams, focus on online sales tax, so continue what we've been doing there. Obviously, that's a challenge for cities across the country. Responsible spending, attracting quality businesses so that we can continue to grow the tax base, and then opportunities for energy efficiency to save money on the other side. Historic past, smart future, preserve neighborhood character, looking at historical designations or districts of some sort. Walkability, bikeability came up quite a bit. Strong identity as a foundation for smart growth, so I thought that was insightful to say figure out what you want to be first and then figure out how to manage towards that. And then this concept of innovation, again, not specifically defined, but let's be more innovative. Strong infrastructure and community parks. Maintain and improve our current infrastructure. Updates to parks, whether or not, mostly they weren't specific parks, but just kind of let's keep up what we have, that type of theme. Sewer and water infrastructure was mentioned, additional bike paths, and then residential quality and maintenance. And again, some of that was on the code enforcement side, some of that was on the development side. And lastly, on the themes, organizational excellence, communication to the community, so just making sure that we're doing a good job on the staff side in communicating out any potential changes or impact or things that are going on. Continuing our resident engagement. So we've had some activities over the last couple of years, making sure we vary those methods and continue those activities. Council decorum was mentioned, and also addressing the homeless issue. This came up in a number of different areas, probably most appropriately under what's missing, but certainly a large concern in the community. Related, what's missing? So potentially some items that are either fit under the categories in some way, and that's for you to decide eventually, or require a standalone theme or goal going forward. Environmental sustainability, related, recycling and trash services were frequently mentioned. A health corridor, I wasn't exactly sure how to capture this. A transit corridor was also, a healthy transit corridor I think was one of the things put up there. This idea of kind of connecting our transit area and the hospital, our medical district, focusing on the walkability, bikeability. I think that's what folks are getting at, but I don't want to fill in too many blanks. Community cohesion in some way in defining that, and then connections between childhood to aging adults, so kind of that whole generational, multi-generational approach. So the last slide is next steps. I suppose I'll maybe ask council if there was anything that I missed in the recap that you wanted to highlight that you heard maybe in your small groups. I tried to bounce around as much as I could, but I didn't get around to all that discussion.
Any comment? So you can go on.
All right.
I think you did a great job capturing it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course, I had to take the pictures of what I was writing because I did not know what I was writing.
I don't know how you read that.
All right, so looking at next steps. Mentioned this before, but you'll have the community survey results we're expecting at the end of this month. So that's another opportunity. Now, they're not going to be geared towards strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, that type of stuff. but it will give you additional input on the pulse of the community. So certainly want to review that. Also, so after you have that input, trying to stick to the schedule or timeline that we outlined before is looking at some type of retreat. And this would be kind of your biggest opportunity to work together towards making a strategic plan actionable in some way. So we talked about those goal areas. So, based on community input, do those 5 areas encapture what you think that we should work on, or is there something missing, or should we tweak something? Okay, that's great. That's one part of it. But really, to make it actionable, it's about those objectives. So what are the objectives underneath those goals that you all are agreeing are priorities, and giving that the community some expectation on what the direction is for the next year and a half would be probably that time frame. So that could look at a couple different ways. I think we had the discussion of, well, you could break it down in a couple 4-hour sessions. Maybe it's an all day, not a weekday. Don't yell at me for taking a weekend. So that's another option if you want to try to hammer it out in one session or break it up. I think it is important that it feels differently than a study session to allow you to be a little bit more casual. Obviously, it's open to the public and certainly would have it in Englewood and available for the public to attend, but to allow you all to interact more casually and to work through a facilitator. I do think that an outside facilitator, completely up to you, but an outside facilitator could help a bit, that has a little bit more direct expertise in creating a strategic plan to try to get you to those actions, or at least a small handful of actions for your goals. That would, in order for us to capture your goals and objectives into the budget process, we think that it would be great if this could happen in April at some point. I know scheduling is going to be tough, but at least then we have some framework moving forward to say, hey, Council, we've reflected in the proposed budget for 2019 these actions or these objectives within your strategic plan. So if you hit that April time frame, then we've got no issue. If you start getting into May, we could probably make it work, but we got to start developing that budget. I mean, our department's already starting to take a peek at the 2019 budget, believe it or not. So full disclosure, we want to try to make sure that if you do the work to put together a strategic plan, that it influences the budget before we get to the end. So that's that. I think if nothing else, to give us some sense on if you'd like to move forward with that retreat, and if so, perhaps a little bit on the structure of that and timing.
Okay. Councilmember Olson.
Thank you. I think you did a great job of putting together the things that I heard from both of the sessions, and there's a little different feel in both of them. It was really great to do this. I had a number of people tell me that they would love more opportunities like this, that were not just one of the council members' neighborhood meetings or forums where we're just giving them information and asking questions, but where they actually get to dream and think about things and hear other people's perspectives. But with that said, I would strongly love to see us do some kind of a retreat that has 4-hour blocks. I think you know that I usually say this because I am not so sure that we are at our best beyond that, but we haven't tried anything beyond 4 with us yet. We haven't, well, maybe we have. A couple nights where we've gone really late, but not in normal circumstances. And then an outside facilitator I'm fine with. I think some of these things that we know are common themes, we really need to spend some time defining. I mean, we heard over and over, smart growth. Okay, so what does that mean within the context of our comprehensive plan? What did we decide, together, and begin? And that's going to take a lot of work for you all, though, too, to pull some of that together to help us. So I don't know if you have someone in mind for a facilitator that does this kind of work.
Yeah, we'd have to do a little research, but there's a number of firms out there that could help. We would try to make it as economically viable as possible. We wouldn't want it to be a large thing, but just somebody that has that expertise in working with, especially public bodies, and trying to move something
I'd want to make sure the person is a facilitator, not a talker at us, because we need someone, because we've had that where we sat for 3 hours one night and listened to someone lecture us about things, and when we should have been talking about them instead. So I just want to make sure that that's kind of the general.
Yeah.
gift set, skill set
Yeah,
that they
and-
bring to the table.
And to that point, I mean, you've done a lot of pre-work, so it won't be, I don't think it'll be so abstract that we have a really loose scope of work and we're not really
Yeah.
sure how to identify somebody.
Yeah.
We can certainly do work on the staff side in presenting you something based off of what you've done and then what you heard from the community and saying, here's a menu of options or a menu of objectives or actions that could fit under these goal areas, that you at least have something to work from, and a facilitator would have to work from. So we could try to do a little bit of both.
I would also recommend maybe one be a Saturday and another one be an evening, so that we have, for those of us that have full-time, daytime, normal Monday through Friday jobs, that we are not the ones penalized for the time that we have to spend together.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I'd like to echo the sentiments of Councilmember Olson, and thank you so much for all the hard work you did and all the staff. I got really great feedback from people. They really enjoyed it, and I heard over and over, when's the next one? When's the next one? We can't wait to have it again. And I think folks really did also enjoy the small group activities. And I think it was really beneficial for the neighbors to talk to each other and hear from each other as opposed to from us. So I think that part was really beneficial. I think some folks were really surprised at how their neighbors feel about things. They have totally differing opinions, so I think it was really valuable to have them discuss together. And I also agree, I think we should break it up into several sessions. This is going to be a lot to try to figure out in one session, so I think to Councilmember Olson's point, we'll be at our best if we break it up into kind of digestible chunks so we can give it our best every time.
Thank you. Councilmember Wink.
Thank you. I prefer all of this to be completed at once, but I understand diminishing returns and fatigue from an 8-hour meeting. I can go either way in terms of the 2 blocks or the all-day session. I do like the idea of having an outside facilitator. I think that would be really great to get an objective perspective in guiding us, someone who maybe doesn't know us, and someone objective. And I like the time frame in April. I think, as you mentioned, it would be helpful for us to get it done sooner rather than later. So I'm on board.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Councilmember Berentine?
I am, like Councilmember Wink, I'm good with either way. I do believe that we lose something when we split it up. Councilmember Wink, I think you make a good point that there can also be some diminishing returns if it goes on too long, especially a day when we work. I mean, work, and that's hard too. And it takes, so nerves do get frayed after a while, but if it's on a weekend or something, maybe that might be a doable thing. And my concern is that while there may be some diminishing return on something over 4 hours, and I don't think this group has any problem working together on a longer goal like that, I'm concerned that then we lose something when we try to go back, and that we almost have to spend a certain amount of time kind of reinventing the previous meeting and figuring out where we're at. So we'll have to decide whether for this particular exercise, whether it would be best served in a more comprehensive session all at one time and see it kind of from beginning to end through, or whether we would be better off with it. I'm good either way. I'm okay with an 8-hour session. I just do have a concern that we might lose a little something, and then time-wise lose some of the information, having to reinvent it again. And then we do have a tendency when it gets split up like that to start going, no, what you really said was, oh no, what I brought up was, and then trying to, recreate some of the issues. So if you guys would just keep that in mind, I'm really open to whatever way the majority of council wishes to do it. I just wanted to make those observations.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. I would prefer the 8 hours, but I certainly won't have any misgivings if we go 4 and 4 as well. I'd like to give it a run, see what we can do. I also wonder, can we get it done in 8? I hope that's the case. I could definitely see that spilling over further than that too. So see how much we can get done in one day and then see what carries over as well. But if it goes 4 and 4, that's fine. But I would also support the outside facilitator. And I would put the emphasis on facilitator as well, as opposed to somebody providing too much input. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I actually agree with everything that has been shared. I do believe 8 hours is a long day. However, with that being said, I think when you split it up into 2 groups, you spend time reviewing to get us back to that point. And so I'm wondering if it's possible that if we schedule it in one day, that we would have 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, if we could actually accomplish more than splitting it in half and doing 4 hours at a time. And I absolutely would love to have a facilitator, because then I don't feel limited in not being able to share. I mean, I know I have an equal say, but I try to focus on making sure the facilitation is going on. So I am absolutely for that, but I do want a facilitator, not somebody that will direct where we're going. So with Councilmember Olson.
Yeah, I am okay with doing 8 hours, but I don't believe people should have to take vacation time for it and take a day off of work, and so I'd really prefer to have it on a Saturday. I do believe that actual breaking it up has more benefits than not, for a number of reasons. One, and it really does depend on the facilitator. If you don't have a facilitator who can do that and think like that, then it's not going to work, because they won't be able to take us where we were. When I've done this with groups, usually if it's a productive group, it will have even more energy to go into the next session of it. But it requires everybody to be really focused and have read and done all their work. And in the between time, some things can come up that can help. Hopefully they don't distract. But to be honest, all of us go back and re-question what decisions we made all the time on this group and others in the past. So that's given. It's just going to happen.
I mean, that's normal.
I do think that it's part of the natural process for groups. But I'm not against doing 8 hours. I don't want to do it during a Monday through Friday. I just think it'll be really difficult, and I don't think it's fair.
Okay, and with that being
Saturday or Sunday.
with that being said, I could lean that way also. And if one of us leans that way, it ends up being a 3-3 consensus. However, I do believe it might be a good idea, as you're finding a facilitator, that the facilitator might be able to give some direction on that also. I do agree with what Councilmember Olson is saying, and I don't want people to take vacation time either. So I don't know if we end up with people working on weekends or what, but we could do a doodle type thing to find out. Okay. So so let's just let this simmer until next week. Will you be back for?
Yeah, but I think it would be smart for you to start looking for who and asking them, can you recommend a format that would be 4 hours versus 8, and what would that look like, and what do you think of the wins and losses for that, given their style? I just think it really depends on the facilitator. And
Okay. I want to end this pretty quickly. Councilmember Barentine, did you have something else?
Well, just the guidelines that we would put forward for the facilitator. We need to have some
Okay.
format. I would like for council to see that ahead of time and agree on.
All right. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will adjourn this meeting, and we will take a restroom break and be next door at 7:05.
Whoa.